Okay, we're going live here. I'm going to invite Touria from 154 to join us this morning. Really excited for this conversation. We have folks joining from our community. Hi, Touria.
Hello.
How you doing? We did it. I never know
Yes.
if Instagram Live is going to work.
You would have waited 2 more minutes. I would have send you an email I didn't receive
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
any.
Yeah, no, I did it right on time. Thank you so much for joining, especially on a Saturday morning. Really appreciate it, and very excited to chat with you here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Amazing. So yeah, just to set the stage a little bit, at Cohart, we are starting to partner with fairs and bring tools that support transactions and community development and back-end management. And our community has been super curious to learn more about the fair ecosystem, both as collectors and as artists. And I think for us, we're really focused on accessibility and how to broaden the art market and broaden exposure, and we think a lot about technology, but I think for you, you've been able to really address accessibility from the fair ecosystem perspective and change the way that the market is moving on a global scale. So I'm very excited to chat with you. And I'm also excited about your own personal story, having a father who was an artist and then coming into the landscape and deciding to make a change and an impact, again, from a more systemic perspective. So excited to dive in. But again, thank you so much for joining.
Well, thank you for having me. As I said, it's quite a unique, journey, but it's an interesting one.
Yeah, 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 great. So let's start a little bit with your story, Toria. Do you want to just tell us more about how you ended up here from a personal standpoint, and then we'll dive into the fair and kind of the history and where it's headed.
Well, my journey is a very different one. Obviously, I had the chance to grow up in a household with a father who was an established Moroccan artist. So I grew up in Morocco, I want to say in the 70s, without too much revealing my age. But at that time, Morocco was not the Morocco of today. We had very few, cultural platform, no institutions, for contemporary art. So I think my first art education really and practice that I was able to see and observe was definitely my dad.
Mm.
And my dad himself, had the occasion to do his, I guess, learning in Paris and do les Beaux-Arts and has his first, 10 years of international experience in Paris before coming back to Morocco, where he had, this very global, international, engagement with the local galleries from Europe. And honestly, deciding to go back to Morocco was really deciding to rebuild your career from scratch, because nothing of those elements were part of the infrastructure of Morocco. So I have to say I'm definitely was in a better position to understand art, what it was to mean to live with an artist, because it was not just being influenced by his art, but it was really a lifestyle. His studio was in the house, so all his engagement, from collectors to even the first gallery, that came to life, what's happening in the house. So there's a lot of connections, that you observe when you're young that might not thought very useful at the time, but, became, part of my journey later on when I started building 154. And I think, I had the chance to go study something very serious like finance, because my father actually, who was very creative, thought it was very difficult to be creative. He was like, I want my daughters to be like independent, to work and do something serious, I don't want them to be, artists. And obviously you can imagine that an artist creates children that are more creative than
Yeah.
but he was very, very strict about us, first getting, our diploma in something, that was a bit more practical.
Mm.
And I had the chance to come to the US, to study here finance, and then start my career in a definitely different, career path. That was actually, a good one. I loved it, for the first 10 years. This was, the journey I was on, without thinking that one day I would do 154. But little by little, your life takes you in a journey. And my professional journey took me into working for a corporate, company that sent me to Middle East and Africa. And the idea of discovering Africa through my professional job was extremely important and instrumental, because I was able to discover, a lot of artists in the local art scenes that I thought were really talented. I didn't know why I would use them one way or the other, but I was just curious because my dad was an artist, and obviously, I felt there was a connection on my curiosity there, and understanding what was there in those ecosystems that I didn't know. One thing I realized, really early on in those trips, was that those artists were bold, exciting, super talented. But when I was living in London, or even in the US at one time, there was absolutely no, traces of those artists in the cities where I was living. It was like they were not crossing the geographical borders. They could have been, the most important artist in Mali, but nobody had heard about it in Europe or in the US. So it kind of triggered a lot of questioning in my head. But I think because it was not at the time my industry, I didn't really think, something of it. I just thought, it's a shame, they're so talented. They should be, part of the discussions. But at the same time, I was like, I didn't really dig into it to see if there was such a platform, that really was in existence. But I didn't know about it because I was in the tech and finance, world. And I think part of the journey is, this mixture of my professional life and my dad, getting older, being a bit more slower into engaging with, his professional, career, where he had less appetite, let's say, to do international exhibitions and what it entails. Today, you have famous established artists. They have a huge studio with 30 people working there, taking care of all the logistics. But my dad was old school, his studio, he was, there on his own. So the whole managing, logistics for even an international show was just too much, So I supported a bit of this, when I was able to travel back to Morocco. And we really is, also very soon realized that even his story, for as an established artist in Morocco, he had a secondary market. He was really known and still very known in Morocco as one of the first figurative artists. But to be able to do an international exhibition, in London, for example, which was the case of the last one I helped him do, it was a super big challenge in terms of logistics, getting him, out there, and like really, it kind of like make me understand, let's say, what African artists were really facing. First the visibility aspect, but then all the complexity of being based in Africa, and then getting into this eco art system that only counts if you're on the global stage and not if you're from Morocco, really. And I think this is pretty much where this idea started coming to life, where I thought this is really not normal. We're like ignoring a whole continent, and
Yeah.
and I don't really see it, changing. All the big, international art fairs that I knew about, that I loved, I would make a game with myself counting the African artists, African artists from the diaspora. And I'm talking 2011, 2013, when I was starting thinking about the project. And I could count them on one hand, and I was like, this is absolutely not right, and I think that idea was also a response to my father, what I wished for him to have, in terms of a platform, in terms of, the possibility of having a platform that was relevant to them, give them access to institutions, to collectors, to curators, and definitely give access to African artists, like for all this international, ecosystem that until now had no access to it. And I think we really tried, and I want to say, because it was me doing and launching the first edition, and really fast after the first edition, understanding the scope of work and the bridge we had to fill, because you had this responsibility suddenly of like, this would be the first exhibition of like so many artists from the continent. So I mean, I think 154 became really fast, this platform that became, a platform that would be the voice for so many artists, that didn't have a voice before. And definitely, I wanted it to be a possibility of artists to access, the institutions, the curators, the collectors, And I think this is what we tried to build, I guess, in building it in London first,
Mhm.
because first I was living in London, and I thought it was, more simple for me to understand my own ecosystem there, and knowing it was a very important, I want to say, art city in the
Mhm.
world, of the global art market. And then, realizing, that, the enthusiasm was there, the interest, the curiosity was there. So we did a very small edition, which was only 17 galleries in 2013, in this great place, Somerset House, where we still, conduct a fair every year. And it was a sold out, after the first 2 days of the fair. So that gave us a lot of courage, to start the second edition, which doubled in size and was also sold out, the second year. And then, we realized in that second year a lot of things, that, a lot more institutions were in the US. The US market was so important, that to accelerate, I guess, this integration, this visibility for those artists, it was very important for us to be in New York, and be somewhere where we had access to the American, institution, American collectors. And I think New York, once we had the blueprint of London, was quite easy. We had a model, we were able to be the satellite art fair of Frieze. Frieze was also happening in New York, at the time. So we kind of copied and pasted, what is it we did in London. But what was very different for us, in terms of, the US market, was also understanding the audience, we were dealing with. So let's say London was closer to Africa, so we had definitely a stronger, history link with the continent there, because of the colonial past, but also because of the proximity of the geography, that we were talking about. And I think when we arrived in the US, it was a very different, positioning, because it was more about, the visibility, the integration of those artists into the market. There was less of a link with the continent itself and the geography. And, we also always claimed that we were about Africa and the African diaspora. And you have to remember that when we arrived in the US, it was in 2015, which was also very, very different landscape for African American artists that we know today. And we became, also a platform for African American artists, galleries representing African American, artists as well, as part of that diaspora. And also African Caribbean artists were suddenly, part of the discussions and the engagement. And then we also had access with a pool of like very wealthy Black collectors who were extremely interested in what we were doing, which we could only tap in, in New York. So it really gave, a different identity to the fair, once we were in New York, and a very, very interesting one for us, in expanding, I guess, even our vision of our diaspora, and what it meant. What we've realized is like all those, African artists or African diasporan artists had kind of the same story about having been ignored and not part of the discussion, and not, being with full visibility, like I guess the European or American, more westernized, artist. And we needed to change, I guess the canon of selection, for those institutions, for those collectors, and being part of the dialogue. And I think this is, I think, what I hope we're able to accomplish by being every year in the same place, for almost now 10 years in New York. I think we are at 13 years in London and 6 years in Marrakesh. But it's the repetition and the constant, engagement with those artists, that is important.
Yeah.
It gives them a lot of visibility. And I think this is where I came from. I don't know if I was supposed to stop a bit earlier, but
No, 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 it's amazing. Yeah, it's just an incredible amount of growth that you've had in the decade, and I think again there's a impression already on the landscape and on the market from the fair itself. And I love that idea of just non-interest versus non-access. And I think what you've done is really open up the access, and you see the interest and you see things shift. And so it's really incredible to see it flourish in different parts of the globe. I guess one question is just when you look back now, I mean, now you have a different perspective because you've seen it be so successful. Like, what do you feel most proud of, as a director and as someone that's brought this all to life?
I would definitely think the ecosystem that we have built is definitely what I'm proud of. I think for a lot of those artists, we're dealing with galleries and artists that have been ignored, have not been, engaged with. So I think what's very distinct about 154 is like, the multiplicity of voices we're able to
Mm.
do with and represent and give them access. We have artists, that had their first exhibition with us, but have gone to, being part of like major collection institutions or like being part of the Venice Biennale, and I think building those strong community around them is, what I think I will, be the most proud of 154 today, is really getting them the tools and access to become part of this, global art world. And definitely, the idea is like really keep this, image of a catalyst platform where people come, and have their first show with us, and the galleries are coming to engage with 154 because they want their first experience in an art fair to be with 154. And I think, building a platform with integrity, it's possible. I
Yeah.
think so. Providing a very diverse, content and giving the possibility to engage with a very diverse group of artists for us is also, I think, something that is, I think, one of the most highlight of what we do, and today when I talk to artists, I have a lot of them, like it's the most beautiful thing about, what we do, but we have a lot of them really telling us that, their career would have not been possible with 154, which is kind of unfair because I think the galleries are the pioneer here, because
Mhm.
we are dealing with the end of the journey of an artist in a way, because they have already found their gallery, their struggle, I wouldn't say is over, but it's already more professional already. They have a platform and a gallery who's supposed to represent them, promote them, make sure they do art fairs, etc. But I think because they were not invited to do international art fairs, and I'm really saying that in the beginning because even that landscape has really changed since 2013. We see a lot of our galleries now being invited in much more international art fairs, and giving artists a definitely much more global stage, and you see them having understanding how the art market work, which is amazing, and getting definitely those level of recognition that they deserve. But at the time, like those first 5 years were, I guess very instrumental in the way they were able to build their career.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we have a lot of art in some small to medium sized galleries. And I'm curious, what you've seen, like the role of the global market is so important, right? Like having global international exposure. And how would you sort of recommend or give advice to people that are building their career in the art ecosystem to um, develop themselves more internationally? And why do you feel like that's important?
Well, I think, nowadays, more than anything, any moment in time, I think, is really to do things with, I want to say, authenticity, be grounded with your local community,
Mhm.
and also understand that you're dealing with the, international global market as well. So you have to have this open global mind, where you don't want to be restricted to your context, but at the same time, you don't want to lose, I guess, your
Yeah,
community, where you're from, and your reality. I mean, I think this is very important for galleries as well. I think more galleries coming from the African continent, or even international galleries trying to represent, artists from Africa or from the African diaspora. It's like for them to understand their community, understand where they're coming from. Definitely, if you're an international gallery trying to represent African artists, go see where they come from.
yeah,
Like go understand their life, their reality, their inspiration, because that will make me make you a better promoter of that artist, a better voice for them, you know, into the art market. And I think it's not just transactional. And I think today I feel it's very, very important that people think beyond the transaction. And I know we need money to pay the rent, and I know we need money, you know, to actually pay the artist. And, you know, we're all small businesses at the end of the day, you know, like, so we have the challenges of small businesses, but at the same time, it is important to be true to the artist, to be true to the value of the artist. It's also important for the artist to be true to himself and
Yeah.
understand why, you know, he will prefer to be with one gallery to another. And I mean, to be fair, I would say that to artists as well, to be also very more loyal to the galleries, you know, that are discovering them and, you know, are pursuing, you know, I guess the first, in a way, bet on them, you know, like trying to get them there, and, you know, bank on the fact that this collaboration could work together, and, like, you know, promote them, invest in them, etc. I think, you know, in every relationship there's an ending of it, and you move up, you move to another, you know, level, or somebody who can bring you different kind of relationship. But it's very important that it's done in a more loyal, but you know, I want to say, sorry, I don't find the word in English, but definitely with more integrity from the artist
Yeah.
side and also from the gallery side,
Yeah.
understanding the complexity and challenges of each, you know, people life and career and financial challenges, you know. But I think we should all be here for the long you know, the long term, I want to say, relationship rather than the short term transactional
Mhm.
relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. I always use the word global. Like you have to have the global approach, but then also the local rooting. And it's really interesting for your fair as well, because with contemporary African art, like being in London, you know, or being in New York, like I think you do a lot of programming and curation that helps contextualize the art within the fair. And I'm curious for people that are planning on attending the fair or want to learn about the different editions of the fair, like how do you sort of see them being unique, you know, Marrakesh versus New York versus London.
I want to say that, you know, we chose New York and London because of their internationality, you know, the fact that
Mm.
they were in the center of things. We are really aware as well that, you know, we are competing with some of the best programs in town. When you're in London and in New York, you know, we are, you know, having to, you know, find our little space, you know, in
Yeah.
this incredible week of like multiple art fairs
Mhm.
and, you know, gallery shows opening, one better than the other, you know. So it is a bit of a challenge. But I think what's very important to us in the terms we do things is that we are always very boutique, we're very small, we have the chance to have a lot of the artist presence. And I think for, you know, the visitors that are curious about discovering but learning more, I think we're offering a more immersive experience in many ways, where, you know, you can take your time, you can actually, you know, speak to the galleries that will always have, you know, this engagement in explaining the work. They know how much, you know, more context they have to give. So the experience is very different. I remember, you know, some more established galleries doing 154 telling me that actually they love to be there because the curators and the institutions have time. You know, they
Mm.
come and they stay and they want to engage and they want to, you know, really learn more. And I think this is, you know, for anybody who visit the fair, is like, please ask questions, please be, you know, demanding from the galleries, but from the artists who honestly, which is a very big compliment for us, love to be at 154, you know. So they're there, they're really happy to explain their work. We do a lot of artist encounters, you know.
Mm.
As you said, we have a huge educational program that goes with the fair,
Mhm.
and a lot of special projects that put everything back, you know, in frame. And I think it is a very easy fair to digest in many ways, because it's small. You like the New York edition, you'll discover only 30 galleries. There's probably more than 80
Mm.
artists from Africa and the African diaspora, but at least it will give you a good, you know, sneak peek, or, you know, first interest in learning more, in getting to get more interested in this particular, you know, specific, you know, community. And I think everybody would enjoy the experience. Something that you leave from New York, first of all, I want to say you were asking, what was the difference between my all the other fairs? It's
Hmm.
like New York is where we change the venue the most.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting.
we are always looking into, very interesting venue, but to be
Mhm.
fair, it's the real estate market in New York that make us
Yeah.
change more than we want. But I mean, with the years, we also experienced, all the neighborhoods of New York. So
Mhm.
for people who have been following us since 2015, they did an immersive experience once, years in Harlem, years in Brooklyn. We had the chance to be in Tribeca this year.
Mhm.
Our beautiful venue is in the financial district. It's the first time we're there, and we're learning also, from the community around us, and where we are and a lot of the people tell us that often they come for either the first time, when we're in Harlem for 2 years, a lot of the collectors were saying that, they don't come, to those kind of venues, which are
Mhm.
very nice venues, by the way. Once we were in a church, another time we're in the old Gavin Brown space, but they had never had a chance to discover those spaces. So I think, part of the experience in New York is really about discovering, the fair in this new venue.
Mhm.
And Definitely, because the fair is small, we're always trying to, curate the show in a way that people will not, have the same experience every year. So we are very careful with our selection committee to choose, galleries that are really enriching the program every year, and that people, even if they came 2 years in a row, would definitely have a completely different experience. And it's very important because when you only have 30 galleries, people remember, it's not something that you can't digest because you've seen 200 galleries a day, like
Yeah.
it's something you can remember. And I think in London, as I said, the relationship is more European centric from a collector point of view, from an institution point of view, for even a visitor, specific point of view. In terms of audience, I think what's very exceptional about us is that we have a very diverse audience. I
Mhm.
don't want to talk about race in general, but like, the art world is often a bit too white to
Yeah.
my taste. And I think the fact that we have content that is appealing to a more diverse, audience, we have a chance to engage different, communities, which is very, interesting because they bring a lot of different energies to the fair. And I think this is true, and holds true for the three fairs. And Marrakesh, to be honest, I think for us, it's a very different experience. It's definitely more immersive. It's pretty much all of what we try to do, over, building in New York and London, but like giving an example in context, I guess, in situ, where
Mhm.
people come to Africa to actually see, those artists coming from that continent, and we are giving them context, so they
Mhm.
come, they have this very immersive experience. We also work with the whole city, so the program of the fair is as little as it can be. We want people to come there every day, but what we're the most proud of is our work and engagement with the whole city, cultural platform, foundation, artist-led initiatives, artist residency program. So we definitely put more emphasis in the experience of coming to Marrakesh for the first time. Obviously, you can buy art at 154, and we want you to
Yeah.
buy art at 154, but we really want you to experience, those
Mhm.
artists and, the studios and I think part of the success of Marrakesh is really offering, the ability to discover art in a very different way, where you have more engagement with the artistic communities, with cultural platforms. And I think collectors are definitely more and more, willing and wanting to have different experiences when it comes to art.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we have a lot of say like emerging collectors in the Cohart community, and I'm curious how you would advise them to approach the fair landscape. Like I always feel like it's such a great way to get your feet wet and learn, about art that you're interested in and get so much exposure in a limited amount of time. But I'm curious, like from your perspective, like what advice would you give a collector that's just getting started?
I would definitely, say see a lot of it to develop your taste and understand what you like, because I would always, anytime suggest a collector to buy what he loves rather than, an investment, because my own experience as a young collector, I don't have so many. I'm not young, but I'm young in my collection. I don't have so many. I don't have a huge budget, and obviously I buy, what I really feel a real engagement with. But I want to say my tastes have changed. From that first thing where I was really attracted to something, that I really want to see every day on my wall. Like it's something that is very important. But when I say, see a lot of it, because you will develop a taste, what you really like, what you don't like. Are you more about abstraction and like, or more figurative, or both of the? Do you like photography? Do you like to do live painting? You're more into installation and sculpture. I think you have to see a lot of it and understand a lot of it to actually start making the right choice. And I think honestly, from my own knowledge, there's so little chance that your big piece, or young emerging artist will become the next Basquiat. It might become a great artist, eventually, but you might be living with this piece of art for a very long
Yeah.
time as well. And I think buying it because you are enjoying it and you're enjoying that relationship with the artist, and you're engaging with his work and his mission. And I know young collectors are definitely more into a real value in terms of when they collect. They need to understand that the artist has also similar views, maybe socially, politically, and aesthetically, is very important. So I would definitely think that for the young collectors, try to understand as much as you can, for the artist. And I mean, today I know young collectors are definitely much more into digital, engagement, and I think in social engagement as well, with all those social platforms. And I think it's very important to connect. I mean, today you have the chance to be able to connect with those artists, understand them better. I know for us, it's been super instrumental, to have Instagram, to be able to have a conversation with an artist in Ghana or in
Yeah.
Nigeria or South Africa. Those collectors might have never, taken the trip, or maybe now are thinking about it. I don't know, but like getting engaged in understanding, the artist practice is very, very important. So I would start from there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Toria, we're almost at time already, which is crazy. But I have two more questions that I want to make sure that we ask. So the first is just common misconceptions about contemporary African art, and also the role of 154 that you see in changing the conversation with contemporary African art.
Well, I think the biggest misconception is that contemporary African art is like this monolithic, view of one geography, because we're obviously talking about,
Yeah.
Africa and
Yeah.
African diaspora. But I think what people first have to remember, Africa is one of the largest continents on the planet. It's something that, people have a tendency to forget. And I think I didn't talk about the title of the fair, but, the fact that it's called 154, it references, the fact that we're talking about one continent, yes, but 54 countries. And for us, what is very important is really underline, I want to say, the complexity, the multiplicity of this creative, we're giving a voice to by engaging them with the platform. It's not really trying to give this very flattened definition of Africa, but we want to show the breadth of the creatives that are coming from this continent. So I think for me it's really changing this perception of people thinking of African art, or people asking me what is how is it themed, or is
Yeah.
there a trend, or can you recognize African artists from their color or vibrant colors or whatever. And I know that they would like it to be more
Packaged.
rational
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
understand it better. But we are talking about 54 countries, so it's very important to understand that we're dealing with very different socially, politically, economically, developed countries, first of all. And on top of it, they are producing, art that, yes, might be bold, might be challenging, might be exciting, but there's no
Yeah.
trend. There's no, one size fits all, type of African artist that they would like to provide. So think of it as a very large range of creatives, rather than one, one definition of Africa.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then I guess the last question, just as we wrap up, is like as a leader in this market, which is a very dynamic again, global evolving landscape. What advice would you give to other people that are building their careers in the art landscape, and what advice has sort of guided you to the stage that you're in now?
I think it's really, I know it sounds maybe cliche, but it's really being authentic with yourself. Try to build something that is built with integrity and that you can respect, and it's possible. So I think have some kind of a commitment to what you're really wanting to do and why you're choosing this path. And are you there to just experience it, and then it's going to be a short experience because you won't be committed, or is it really something that you want to do long term? And I think the young generation, think short term, and I think I would like them to sometimes see the longer term, because when you're dealing with artists that you decide, even from a young career, because usually you have young gallerists, having the whole network of friends of young artists, and they are working and collaborating together, usually in their first, representations and their first shows. And it's also understanding that you're part of their commitment to development as well, and make sure that you can't just have a short-term view of transaction, and you might need to, but like it's really trying to understand that building a much more collaborative world, and with the long-term strategic, I want to say, planning for your commitment to those artists is very, very important, because you're a big player in their life, and I think they need to be able to in a way count on your commitment to develop them, to have the best interests for them, and not just be experiencing something very cool because you think the art world is cool and you want
Yeah.
to be part of it, but like rather really understand what the art world is about, trying to get as much experience in all the different fields that the art world is able to provide, so you have a better understanding of where you want to fit in this ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's great advice. It's a through line for the whole conversation is around authenticity. Okay, and then amazing. So as we wrap up, we have the fair coming up soon. So how can people attend the fair? What should they expect in New York for all of the collectors looking to experience the show?
So the fair is happening between the 8th and the 11th of May, from at Halo, which is on 28 Liberty Street. I think the access door will be on Pine Street, but like the reality is the address and the building is known as 28 Liberty Street. I think visitors who don't have tickets, can go on our website, and it's 1-54.com, and get their tickets, and really, enjoy the experience. Come several times. Come talk to artists. Come make sure that you know what the 154 is about, and I hope you join us in our little community of followers and be part of our journey.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Toria. We're really excited and honored that you took the time, especially with the fair right around the corner, and excited to share the fair with our community. And yeah, just honored to have your perspectives and insights as a leader in the landscape that's, again, changing the way that the market is moving. So thank you again. And we'll record the conversation so everyone has access as well for the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you, Toria. Let's see if I can do this. Okay.